When we last left off, I was halfway through the rebuild of an absolutely obliterated 4Runner suspension. We had solved the mystery of the missing suspension bolt, fixed the worn out rod ends and bushings, and repaired some other easier things. Now it's time for the front suspension, which is also not okay. How do we fix this? A welder, and money, probably. We got most of this list done last time, and by most I mean like 5 things. This time we're going to take a crack at the rest of it, hopefully getting it all done and hopefully not extending this video into a part 3, which really does not need to happen. The front suspension is the big thing. We'll get into that first. We also need to replace the wheel liner since they got blown out when I blasted through that river crossing. I also need to reattach my front fascia, which also got wrecked by that water. My LED lights don't work, so I'll fix that. The wind deflector looks like actual trash, so I'll replace that with a nice laser cut and powder coated piece from Send Cut Send. We need to fix up this wiring, replace my dash speaker, put on a new awning cover, fix the reverse camera, add tag lights, change the oil, and check the rear brake pads. We're probably not going to finish all this stuff, so let's start with the important things. I thought my front suspension was mostly okay, except for this one conspicuous problem. It's not, it's all bad, but we'll get to that later. For now, the shock tower. When I drive way too fast over bumps, the load goes right into here. It's a bit odd that this cracked because when too much force is applied, the spring gets compressed and the load goes into the bump stop. The only thing that would allow this to happen is if the shock had too much damping, which it definitely doesn't. So I suspect there's something else going on here. Let's find out. The crack itself was a pretty easy fix. I just welded it up. I had Send Cut Send make a reinforcement piece that I was going to weld on, but I decided against it. I don't think we actually need this. Before I welded it up, I cleaned it with a wire wheel and my grinder stopped working. The rear suspension ate my Sawzall, and as nice as it was to buy a new one of those, my budget for power tools is maxed out for the month. It turned out the problem wasn't the grinder, it was the battery. It doesn't seem to want to charge. When I put it on the charger, it flashes for a few seconds and then stops, but it's still depleted. Weird. The connectors look pretty rough. I probably shouldn't clean these with a wire brush, but I'm going to. That did not help. I found a couple of videos online that said you could jumpstart a dead battery by just wiring some jumpers to another battery. I gave that a shot, but nothing. Oh well, we tried. I'll just buy a new one. How much is a new one? $90? Jeez, never mind. We'll get that back out of there. You're not supposed to throw these things away anyway. Let's take it apart. It appears to be only getting 17 volts. These things are labeled as 20, but they're actually nominally 18 volts. They'll go above 20 when full, but something is fishy with this one. There are 10 cells in 2 pairs. 4 of the 5 pairs are getting above 4 volts, which is great, but one is below 1 volt, which is not good. I pulled out my battery charger to try to charge just this one pair back here, but the charger said the voltage was too low. Yeah, that's why I'm trying to charge it. That's what you're here for. That's your entire job. So I moved it to the floor away from all the flammable stuff and charged all the cells in an effort to get the one dead cell voltage up. This got the voltage high enough to get the one cell to charge by itself. Then I went and discharged each pair of cells to the same level. The DeWalt charger is supposed to do this, but I'll make sure they're all the same just in case. After a couple of days, I checked the battery and it was still holding voltage and still balanced pretty well. So that's finished. Now we can get back to whatever we were working on before. Something about suspension. Oh yeah, the 4Runner. After taking apart the shock assembly, it became pretty clear why the tower broke. It's because the aluminum adapter for the Icon shock broke. So instead of having a nicely distributed load, the shock was just pushing up in the middle, a load case the shock tower was definitely not designed for. But why did the aluminum break? We can look at this part and using our keen intellect, we can deduce a failure mode. Here's what I think happened. I think this part broke first. I hit some giant bump or whatever and it snapped the top off. The top is a swivel joint, so once this part disconnected, there was a bending load going into the bolt, which probably ripped off the other side. Then the shock was just hammering up against this flat piece, which broke in 2. With all these 4 separate pieces, that was kind of a point load going into the shock tower, so it cracked it. All of this probably happened at roughly the same time. In that order, but within a fraction of a second. Probably. Might have taken a little bit longer, but it doesn't really matter. But I am pretty confident this was the first part to break here, because this is where the highest stress is. Threads are really bad for stress. Metals are really sensitive to notches, and threads are just a bunch of sharp notches all stacked up. Weirdly, there were 2 different bolts on the top of these shocks. Neither of them were great. The one on the non-broken side was a black oxide coated bolt. I hate these things. Never use these outside. In fact, just don't use these. The other one was rusted in place, and when I tried to unscrew it, the bolt broke in 2. The bolt on the side with the broken aluminum wasn't rusted in place, but there was corrosion. That could have led to a premature failure. It's also possible that the bolt worked its way loose a little bit, so instead of a nice clamped load, the bolt was wiggling around, hammering loads into the threads. Hopefully, with a new bolt and some Loctite, this will not be a problem in the future. Based on all of the evidence, I think we can safely deduce that the ultimate failure mode was my driving. The next step is trying to remove this half bolt that is rusted in place. I tried using an easy out, but as you probably know, easy outs are never easy. They are difficult outs, sometimes impossible outs. I tried a few different sizes with no luck, then I doused it in penetrating oil, let it sit, then I doused it again, let it sit longer, and then it came out. For the time being, I threw in some cheap shocks and called it good. I still need to take the old ones in and get them rebuilt, but I have a working car for now, so we'll get to that later. When later? Who knows? The upper control arms got new bushings and new spherical bearings. The bearing is pressed in and also held in with a C-clip. I used my trusty press to get these in and out. I should really move this thing inside or at least out of the rain. With those fixed up, I reinstalled the front suspension. The bolts that hold the upper control arms came through the engine bay. We had to use a long rod to hammer them in from the front, but we made it happen. With all of my suspension replaced except for the front lower control arms, I took the car out for a drive expecting everything to be great, only to find out there is still a clunking noise in the suspension. I deduced that since I had replaced everything except the front lower control arms, that the problem must be in the front lower control arms, and boy was there a problem with the front lower control arms. I have completely trashed every bit of suspension on this vehicle. You can buy these bushings themselves, but I decided that I should probably replace the outer ball joint as well, thus completing the replacement of every suspension wear item. Toyota doesn't sell ball joints alone, you have to buy the whole control arm. Other companies do sell a replacement ball joint, but after shopping around, I found that the whole control arms were not much more expensive, so long as you buy them from the right Toyota dealer. By the way, Long Beach Toyota has way cheaper prices on Toyota parts than just about any other dealer. They're somewhat local to me, but they do ship, so check them out if you're in the US and need Toyota parts. Swapping those out was relatively straightforward. You might be wondering why my suspension is covered in powdered sugar. Well, that is a story for a future video. Also, this red thing back here, a future video. A very exciting future video. Anyway, the tricky part of swapping the control arms was getting the ball joint removed. The correct way to do this is to use a ball joint separator tool. You screw it down until there's a little bit of pressure on the ball joint, and then you just tap the steel with a hammer until it pops free. Don't forget to wear your safety glasses. So that's it. All of the suspension on the 4Runner is good as new. I should get another 170,000 miles out of it. Or, with the way I drive, 2 trips to the desert. This experience got me wondering about my other suspension. The Jag is all pretty new, but the Honda hadn't been looked at in a while. I am using rod ends in the upper control arm. It makes adjusting camber super easy, but it's a pretty sloppy engineering solution. Since the rod ends aren't in line with the forces, they see some bending load. Bending is really bad on threads. Why? Because threads are all little stress risers, all stacked up. We already talked about this. Try to pay attention. Stress increases and the likelihood of fatigue failure over time goes way up. There are worse examples of this, like I once saw one of those Kempanaga T-Rex things, and the upper control arms have the same amount of mechanical engineering as a bundt cake. My upper control arms, slightly better. The same engineering as a multi-level wedding cake. Some basic hand calcs and fingers crossed. Not the worst approach, but I did decide to swap out the old rod ends for some newer, nicer, less corroded ones. Okay, back to the 4Runner. My dash speaker has been acting up for a while. It'll just stop working sometimes. You can smack the dash to make it start working again. This is actually pretty satisfying, but it's getting me annoyed more than I'd like, so I decided to fix it. The speaker itself is about $100 from Toyota, but it's only about $50 on eBay. But here's a tip for all you DIY fix-it people out there. If there is a part on your car, there's a pretty good chance it's on 10 other cars from the same manufacturer. So look up the part number and then just search for that part number. Toyota uses this speaker on a lot of cars, and on the used market, a Prius speaker is cheaper than a 4Runner speaker for some reason. I did this, but then I forgot that the 4Runner has the JBL sound option, so I got the wrong speaker and wasted $12. So the real lesson here is to be skeptical of advice you get on YouTube. You all remember my custom $300 roof rack? I made this a few years ago. I cut the front aero shield out of some aluminum and painted it with some underbody coating. Well, the coating is all flaking off, making it look like garbage. I probably did not prep the surface good enough before I painted it. It's also a bit noisy. I fixed part of the noise with these foam pieces shoved under the lights, but I think the hard edge at the top is also making some noise. So I'm going to make a new wind deflector with a bend at the top to pull the airflow down and another bend at the bottom to seal off the roof. I started this all by 3D scanning the existing wind deflector. I didn't really need to do this, but it helped me get the curve at the bottom correct. I used my Intel scanner for this, but it's not great. I did just get a new scanner. This is from the company that let me borrow that nice $10,000 scanner. This one is $1,000, which is less, but still a decent chunk of money. I haven't used this yet, but I'm hoping it's worth the money. Anyway, that is for later. For now, I took the scan and drew up a wind deflector that follows the curve of the roof. I split it up to fit within the size limits and sent it off to Send Cut Send to be laser cut, bent, and powder coated. A few days later, I got a durable wind deflector that will not end up looking like the last one in a few years. I took the old one off, and below that foam I added under the LED lights was super dirty. We could wash it, or we could just put another wind deflector on top of it. I added some trim at the bottom to help seal off the roof. I like it, except this silver part here. It looks like the Forerunner has a receding hairline. So I got some black vinyl wrap that I will put on at some point. Anyway, that's done for now. That was easy. I moved the lights from here to here because I was getting a lot of glare on my windshield and my hood. This will hopefully throw the lights over the hood so that I don't have that problem anymore. But to do that, the lights need to work, and they don't, and I don't know why. I'm guessing it has something to do with this horrendous wiring job I did in here. I'd added an extra battery in here as well as a fuse block to power some stuff like lights and the winch. I'm not usually the kind of person to do lazy wiring, and I'm not really sure why I did it here. I can't remember. Probably this was the temporary solution and I just never fixed it because it's disgustingly dirty in here. I should clean it up and wire it all, but I'm not going to because I don't care that much. The lights I do care about, and that problem was fixed with a fuse. The front light here has never worked. I used to have round lights up here. They came with the truck. They were halogen lights. They were not very bright, and they were not particularly rugged, so after a while they were all banged up and pointing in random directions. So I swapped it for this guy. I mounted it but never wired it, and so now is the time. This was accomplished with some help from my trusty crack lighter. I just wired it into the disused wires from the old lights and just shoved this rat's nest of disgusting wires back under the hood and pretended it didn't exist. We'll go ahead and cross that wiring off the list. I know I didn't finish it, but it's good enough. The front fascia, also good enough. Actually, I could do a third-part video with all the rest of this stuff, or I could just cross it all off the list and move on with my life. Ah, that feels good. It used to be that you had to impress people to get people to watch your show. Now you just have to impress the algorithm. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. All hail the algorithm. Who put powdered sugar and dots all over my car? When did I get a red car? What's going on?